Well, when it comes to investing and saving for retirement, it seems that most people don't have a clear picture on whether they should contribute to a traditional IRA or a Roth. So today we're going to talk about the difference between the two, help you better understand your options, and help better understand what makes sense for you and what you're trying to accomplish. That's coming up now. Welcome in to Dollars with Dennis. Glad to have you on the show once more. I'm Ben George with Dennis Horias, founder and president of Faith 401k and Money Management, helping people with investments and retirement planning. And today, Dennis, this is a good discussion because when you really dial into a lot of the 401k work you do, this is a big discussion that comes up quite a bit, right? Traditional versus Roth.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Ben, by the way. Good to see you.
See you.
Traditional Roth versus Roth, whether it's IRA or 401k, is always a conversation, and having the set answer, a pat answer for every single person, there is not one. It's probably more individualized. There are some generic rules that would go. If somebody's under the age of 40, having Roth contributions is probably a best way to go. If they're over 50, they have time to make the Roth contributions and make up for the tax losses in there. So figuring that out, or a balance of the two. So we spend a lot of time on Roth versus traditional IRA or 401k in both areas for sure.
Yeah, no, it's in the name, Faith 401k. You do the 401k plan consulting with people and help with the investing. So I want to kind of get into this a little bit more because I know people, as they first get into it, part of the trouble with a lot of people is they just haven't been taught any of this, right? This hadn't been educated in what are your investment options? What is a traditional IRA? What is a Roth? What does that mean? So let's just start there, Dennis, and get to the basics of it. Explain the traditional and the Roth and what's the difference between the two.
Great questions. Yeah, so traditional is putting money away on a pre-tax basis. You're either putting in an IRA and getting a tax write-off for it today, or you put it into a 401k and you're putting it in on a pre-tax basis, which means you're not paying taxes today. You're going to pay them later on in life. And in either case, money's in an account will grow tax deferred. The Roth, you put money in, you don't get any tax deduction the day you put it in. It continues to grow tax deferred, and there's several rules around that. But long term, the money comes out of the retirement account tax free. So having both of those options, I think, is important. And being some farming background, I used to talk about the seed in the wagon. So when we would plant corn in the spring, we would take bags of corn out to plant. When we go to harvest, we did not go out with bags. We went out with wagons to do that. And I look at traditional versus Roth the same way. You want to pay taxes on the seed. You want to pay taxes on the wagon of corn. And those are some of the conversations we go through with traditional versus Roth. And both will work for people, and depending on incomes, they're both very important.
Yeah, we'll talk about maybe who will benefit more from a Roth or traditional and get into that a little bit more. But I guess kind of just narrowing it down in the simplest terms, it's either paying taxes now or paying taxes later. I know there's more that goes into those decision makings, but to give somebody a quick kind of explanation of the two, that's the difference. So I know a lot of people will put more money in traditional than Roth. At least over time, that's been the case. Why do you think so many more people have contributed to the traditional versus the Roth? Why do you think that's been the main tool that they've accessed over time?
Yeah, great question. So Roth hasn't been around as long. Most people started working, and they only had one option, a pre-tax or traditional option in their accounts. So they weren't around to do that. And I think still today that a lot of people don't know that a Roth can be inside of 401k. Somebody asked me, so how much can I put in my Roth IRA? And so it's $7,000 or $8,000 a year now. But if they have a 401k and it has a Roth bucket, and most of them do, you can do the full maximum $23,500 a year, or $31,000 if you're 50 or older, into the Roth. So there's a lot more opportunity in the Roth 401k than a Roth IRA, and those options weren't always available to people. But it's still a best kept secret, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I know when I first opened my first accounts, I didn't really know the difference, Dennis, quite frankly, but also I didn't know what was available at the time, and that's just something as simple as asking your HR person, right, or whoever's in charge of your benefits, if that option's available.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about this. So we look for balance. I think if we had tons of tax free money in retirement, we'd all be excited about that. And so people will ask, should I put half in pre tax and half in traditional and half into Roth? Depending on the age and the situation, we might do more into the Roth because the company contribution is going to be pre-tax always. So it's going to be taxed when it comes out. So the now or later question is important on taxes. The company contributions are going to be taxed later for sure when you go to pull money out.
Well, I know you painted that analogy for us with the seat in the wagon, and it makes sense. But can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, just to kind of explain how powerful a Roth can be for anyone that says, "Oh, what's the difference between paying a little bit of tax now versus paying it in retirement? Is it truly going to make a difference, Dennis?"
Yeah. So last episode we talked about one of the common questions we get. Somebody wants to take money out of the retirement account and pay off their house, and if it's all in a taxable account, it's going to create a lot of taxable income in the year you do it. And any withdrawal from a taxable or regular IRA is taxable as income in that year. So if they're making $50,000 a year and they pull out 50,000 to pay off their house, then they made 100,000 a year. So the tax brackets could change, and that's costing people a lot more money than they realize it is. And so if you had in a perfect world, money grows and you have a lump sum when you're in retirement that is tax free that can come out, that can help with emergencies. Emergencies can help with other items and not affect your tax bracket later in life.
All right. So the Roth can provide you, and if nothing else, some flexibility by putting money into both when you get into retirement in terms of what you're taking money out of first and what options you have for that income that you're trying to create. Let's kind of break it down into help people understand maybe what option would be best for them. And again, it's always best to sit down with a financial professional to truly look at your situation to get the full picture before kind of giving you any guidance. But just generally speaking here, Dennis, who would benefit more from, let's start with the Roth over the traditional? Who would you say is kind of that person that fits that mold for choosing Roth over traditional?
So younger people, my kids, they do Roth on my coaching. So they let me handle all that part. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for most younger people for sure to do Roth. So that's who I would start out with in those categories. People that are in lower incomes that don't really need the tax write-off, don't get as much of the tax credit as they would get in the traditional. Maybe if their income's lower, they don't really need to get the tax write-off, so the Roth might look good for them, or it might not make a difference. So depending on where somebody is age-wise, but also income-wise, is important. And back to the Roth 401k, having the bigger maximum limit, contribution limit. It also, there are people that make too much money to contribute to a Roth IRA. So as a family, if you make too much money, you can't do a Roth IRA, but you can do a Roth 401k. The limits do not apply there. So there's reasons for both, and you would use them. So that's why it's pretty much an individual decision. It doesn't take us long to figure out what somebody should do once we get their information and know a little bit more about them and what their goals are.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of why you work with someone like yourself, Dennis, because for most people, they're not going to know those options, right? You're going to say, oh, well, either I make too much or I've reached my maximum for my Roth contributions for this year, my IRA, so I'm done with my Roth money. But there could be other options available out there for you and more opportunities. So again, one of the benefits and value for working with an advisor. All right, so the flip side of that, you kind of mentioned age, I guess, is a primary factor, and maybe if you make too much. But is there any other considerations generally that would maybe lean you more towards a traditional versus a Roth?
Yeah, you need more money on your paycheck. So if your paycheck's really tight, you can put more money away and on a pre-tax basis, creating some more revenue on your paycheck as you go. So that's a huge consideration. Some people need that money now, and God bless America. That's way you can get more on your paycheck. And people are always asking me about how can I get pay less in taxes. Well, I contribute more to your retirement plan, to do that. And just so we don't muddy the water too much, but we're pretty complicated in this business. We name it 401k because when the IRS wrote in section 401 subsection K, the language for deferral, that's why it's called a 401k plan. Well, they forgot about nonprofits. So a few years later in section 403 subsection B, we do it for nonprofits. And then the Roth gets that great name from Senator Roth, who introduced the bill. So we're pretty complicated in getting these rules out there, but lots of ins and outs of and what's good for each individual person is definitely an individual decision, and we can help.
That's a nice little history lesson there, because I think most people don't. They just think the name was just drawn up randomly, or you never knew it was tied into IRS guidelines. So it's interesting how those names come about, but they fit perfectly. So take us in quickly as we kind of wrap this conversation up, Dennis. I know you guys do a lot of the 401k plan consulting. So for someone that is kind of getting into that and starting to put more money into their 401k and looking to do more investing there, how do you help them through this process? Not just traditional versus Roth, but how do you overall help them with that 401k investing?
Yeah, so great question. If we're doing planning for somebody, we want to know how their money's invested, and vice versa. We want to be able to tell them how much they should be putting in to get their goals accomplished and how they should invest that money. So we will actually help them pick the investments that they are that they have available to them, and let them go with those. We always recommend, if you're picking multiple investments, and most people do, setting up a rebalance at least on a quarterly basis, so that as markets shift around differently, your accounts are always set back to the original allocation, which is, I think, very important for people to do, and pretty simple to do in today's world. Just taking a few minutes to do it. And once you set it up, you're pretty much good to go. It's a set and forget it.
Love that. We'll go to 401k.faith to learn more, and also to schedule a time to meet with Dennis there and begin planning your 401k, your investment strategies. They also do a lot more investment management, retirement strategies, divorce financial planning, pension analysis, and much, much more. So to learn more about that, again, go to 401k.faith. But traditional reverse Roth, a big decision, and one that you want to make sure you get right and make sure you're doing in a balanced manner. So the best way to do that is to work with someone that can build out a plan to meet your needs. Dennis, thanks for your time as always. Talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Ben.